This week, Salvage Squad is off up north to the land of rock and donkeys to revisit a project I helped restore with Axel and Jerry. A year ago, Salvage Squad was finishing one of its biggest ever projects. Not the tower, but a Blackpool tram. It was a 1952 Coronation Tram, to be precise, owned by one Philip Higgs, a man obsessed with the things.
So, Phil, let's face it, you are Mr. Tram.
I know, it's sad, isn't it, really?
I don't know about that. When did it begin?
It began when my mum and dad used to take me to Blackpool. They used to go on the fun fair with my brothers and sisters, and I used to say, look, I don't want to go on the fun fair, I just want to watch these trams go by. They were fascinating to me, more so than riding up and down on some roller coaster.
In a strange way, I suppose, it's kind of flat roller coaster.
Well, that's right, yeah, it was still a fun ride to me.
Yeah. And how did you become the proud owner of a Blackpool tram yourself?
I actually wrote a book on Blackpool trams, and then with the proceeds of the royalties that came off that, I actually bought this tram.
Well, how extraordinary.
For £600. Sounds, you know, it sounds like nothing, but it was actually quite a lot then.
Well, it's pretty extraordinary that you wrote a book when you were 16 about trams, firstly, but to then spend the money you made from it on a tram, when others would be buying guitars or record players or...
And there was me, yeah, there was me buying a Blackpool tram. It was a bit difficult to explain to my sort of mates at college.
I'm sure it was. Difficult. I mean, you know, half the notion of buying a guitar was maybe to get introduced to some of the opposite sex. I can't imagine a tram necessarily has the same...
Funnily enough, actually, the opposite sex weren't all that interested. They still aren't.
Philip's obsession with the magical world of the tram got worse the older he got, and he spent 10 years working as a tram driver before becoming a transport consultant, promoting the cause of the tram around the world. He first got hold of the Coronation in 1984 when he was only 16 years old. And although he and his mates have done a great deal of work on her since, it's basically still a wreck.
I've driven tram, you know, virtually every tram in the fleet, but I've never driven this one.
You're telling me you've owned this tram for 20 years, but you've never driven it, nor indeed seen it running?
Never. Never, because this tram was phased out before. I mean, when this tram was phased out, I was actually only 3 years old.
OK, Phil, well, here's the deal. We'll take it away and we'll do it up, but you won't be allowed to see it until it's absolutely perfect.
OK, but I'll believe it when I see it.
You managed not being able to see it for a bit?
Well, I might have to do some peeping.
No. Promise no?
OK.
All right.
The big idea at the time was that the tram would be finished so that Philip could strut its stuff under the famous Blackpool illuminations. But even with the help of Philip's mates and the engineers at Blackpool Transport, we were well and truly beaten by the complexity of the tram's control unit. And when Philip finally got in the cab, the lights had been switched off for months.
It's smooth.
It is smooth.
I can't believe it's working.
No.
These beauties were introduced the year our Liz got her crown, hence their snappy name, the Coronation Tram. Back then, they were to be the future of the Blackpool fleet, with a super high-tech control unit designed to offer a ride fit for a queen. Unfortunately, they were a bit too high-tech for their time, and the whole fleet were withdrawn from service 20 years later. Trundling down the prom that day, she looked great, but looks can be deceptive, and as Philip tried to accelerate, he found the tram was only capable of doing about 10 miles per hour flat out. Even after all those months of work, the control unit still wasn't working properly. 1 year later, and it still ain't. So it's the cause of all our problems.
This is the old culprit, the Vanback unit. Oh. Yeah, after all that work and all that money that was spent on it, it still wasn't right.
That was Jerry's area. Can you pin the blame on him?
I don't think so, no. I mean, it needed some robust testing after 30 years of not going anywhere. It was just unfortunate that this problem arose 2 days before it was due out.
I'm relieved to hear it wasn't our fault. Even though it wasn't our fault, we've had to take it out, strip it down and have experts inspect each part to try and find out why only 1/3 of the electricity is reaching the motors. One of the biggest projects Axel, Jerry and I ever took on. A 1952 Blackpool tram. Even finding it in an old tram shed in St Helens was enough of a task for Suggs.
Where are you?
But once we'd been safely reunited, we were soon hard at work.
Cliff Richard rides again.
Shifting buses and winching her onto a low loader for her first journey in decades, back to our home sheds in Blackpool, where we were going to fix her up for her owner, Philip Higgs.
This is the first time I've seen this move since 1986 when it first came here.
We drove her north to Blackpool to find that the tram spotters had got wind of our arrival and were out in force.
It was when the tram arrived back here almost a year ago, I realised what an incredible beast it was. Dozens of tram spotters came along especially to see it return. One bloke said to me he'd seen lots of them leave, but this was special. This was the first to come home.
It was after that I walked into the tram shed and saw just how big and complex a finished tram really is.
When you get up close, these things are monstrous. I mean, they're more like trains or even boats than buses.
Even finding out what was wrong with ours took a ladder.
That can't stay on for sure.
With Jerry getting acquainted with the rotting roof, electrical engineer Brian Pickup introduced me to the control unit that was to cause so many problems.
It looks disgustingly complicated.
It is very, very complicated, this what we call a knitting machine, and we're going to have quite a struggle with that when we get it down.
So that takes the electricity down
It takes
through
electricity
the pole, from the cables
pole,
above.
and then it goes into that control system.
What it does is it actually controls the amount of electricity you're letting through
It
to the
controls
motors.
the electricity
So it's
going
like
down.
a scale electrics controller. 'Cause it's
Like a
manual.
scale electric's exactly the same thing.
Axel's big job was the motors underneath the floor.
These are the motors?
These are the motors.
How many of these do we
There are
have?
4 altogether.
Really?
Yes, it's
How long has it been sitting here?
been about 20 odd years since it was used. So really they want a thorough check.
It's not going to take
They'll be full of damp, they'll be full of damp, it won't be an easy job.
Right, well, I have to say this job's mine.
It looks like that's a job for you.
The first real job was taking the control unit out, and for that we moved the tram into the electrics bay at Blackpool Transport. I drew the short straw, going up on the roof with 2 electrical engineers, right in the frazzle zone of the 550-volt power lines. So none of us got cooked. The juice was switched off, then each of us locked the switch closed with our own lock, taking the key with us. That way, the switch could not be switched on again if one of us was still on the roof.
So we're going to lift her up, spin her around slightly, and then drop it down. Do you know what sort of weight we're talking there?
No, not really.
No one had shifted one of these in years, and there are only 3 like it in the world. So, as the last cable was cut, we were in uncharted waters.
Okay, should be clear now. You're going to have to drop back in a minute because it's coming up against the cage.
We're nearly on the floor here now.
It looks like something from Doctor Who's TARDIS, bearing the official name, the Variable Multi-Notch Acceleration and Braking Control Unit, or VAMBAC for short. It was the key to making the Coronation better than any tram that had come before. It's like an electric tap, but a very flash one. When the driver pushes a lever in the front of the cab, the tap opens and electricity begins to flow to the motors and the tram moves off. Push the lever further and you go faster. Pull it back and the tap switches off and you slow down. Older trams had similar units, but compared to this, they were about as sophisticated as a village pump. Mind you, there were plenty of village pump-controlled trams still operating on Blackpool Prom, as Suggs found out when he went tram spotting for the first time.
There's over 80 of these things whizzing up and down between here and Fleetwood. It really is like going back in time.
Trams first arrived on the Prom in 1885, but they reached their prime in the 1930s when the then boss, Walter Luff, introduced this balloon class, which still earn their keep on the Prom today, 70 years later. In 1950, when the rest of the world were scrapping their trams, Walter Luff wanted to make sure the trams on Blackpool Prom would still be around long after he was gone. That was the idea behind the Coronation Tram. It was meant to replace all those old bone shakers, a fact that was puzzling Suggs.
I've been tram spotting now for a couple of hours, and I think I'm becoming a bit of an expert. I've even bought Philip's book. But one thing still puzzles me. I've seen loads of trams to the 1930s, quite a few from the 1980s, but none from the 1950s. Why?
With Suggs safely out the way, doing his sleuthing bit, back at the workshop, the show's boffins, Jerry and electrics expert Brian Pickup, were getting to grips with our crazy control unit and proving that two great minds are no better than one.
And so we should check which ones connect to each other.
Right, well, let's start with this one, which is marked LS, if you can find that.
That's the line switch. Now, that should come in on this one.
Oh, yeah?
Ah, no, it doesn't. Just check that the meter works. Yes, the meter works. So, we'll see which one it should come in on. Well, that looks like that's one problem we've got to solve already, because that circuit doesn't connect.
Lovely.
So we're going to have some fun here, I can
We
see
are, aren't
that.
we?
Yes.
MC1.
MC1, that's motor contact number 1. Now, that should come in on that one there. And that doesn't connect either. Oh, well.
Brilliant. Right,
Good.
fine,
Not to
keep
worry.
going.
Yeah, we'll try another one.
BC, go on, brake
BC,
contact.
brake contact to 1.
Hey, I've got this.
Well, that should connect through to something. No? Oh, well, we'll have to sort these out, won't we?
So what you're trying to tell me is it's supposed to have worked 30 years ago, and right now we've got not a sausage.
Not a sausage. But there again, things have been disconnected, so we'll have to go through this and sort it all out.
You're groping in the dark, aren't you?
We are groping in the dark, yes, but we'll carry on and see how far we get.
With the boffins scratching their heads, me and Axe were getting the motors out. At best, they were going to need a complete overhaul, and at worst, they'd be beyond repair. What's it look like down there?
Dirty, heavy. I think we're going to get this prop shaft off first, Claire.
Right, so we're dropping the motor, yeah?
Yeah, this big bit here.
On paper, it's a fairly simple job. Undo 12 bolts on the drive shaft, and then another 4 big ones that actually hold the motor in.
Claire?
Yeah?
Let's get your foot off the edge. Oh, Claire, you're really going to get me in the face in a minute.
But that assumes the nuts are going to cooperate.
Mind my fingers.
And when they don't, there's always the gas torch. Sorry?
This metal just turns into water.
So much more fun than a spanner.
Perfect, done. That was amazing.
So it's all that hard spannering action?
Yeah.
Is that all of it?
Yeah, you should be able to punch these through now.
Right. Now all that's needed is a jack underneath, 4 bolts whipped out from the top, and the whole lot can be dropped down and pulled out. Well, almost.
I'll give it an outside push and you pull, yeah?
Everything on this tram was to be bigger and better than anything that had gone before. It had 4 of these great motors. Most of the other trams only had 2. The whole design was the brainchild of Walter Luff, boss of Blackpool Transport from the early 1930s until the year our coronation was put into service. He sounded like a man with a vision, and we were keen to find out more about him. Sadly, he's dead now, but Suggs had tracked down his daughter Daphne.
He had a 5-year plan, during which time he completely renovated the whole system, and he introduced a whole lot of new trams. They call them balloons, the big ones, and then the little ones are the rail coaches. And then there were some open deck things called boats.
Luff's new fleet were the pride of Blackpool for the next 20 years. But times move on, and Daphne's dad was keen to go one further and introduce a new tram that would be even better.
So this is where the coronation came in.
I mean, he wanted something that was faster and smoother.
Yes. He wanted it to be more comfortable for the driver and the conductor as well. Give a little bit more space, because they were 50 feet long and 8 feet wide.
When it was unveiled, hundreds turned out to watch the Lord Mayor driving our coronation along the prom. But behind the scenes, there was a battle going on in the council chambers, with many wanting to do away with trams altogether and make do with buses instead.
He had great arguments with the council and so on, but he was also fighting against sort of general opinion in the country, where other people had got rid of them and had all got these trolley buses, and they felt he was a dinosaur. In actual fact, he was far more forward-looking than any of the rest of them.
Before it entered public service, the anti-tram lobby did all they could to discredit it, even organising a public demonstration to prove that it was too big to go around one particularly tight bend. But nothing would faze Walter Luff.
My father was at home with me and my mother, and at about 10:30 the phone rang, and it was Mr. Jack Parkinson, the traffic superintendent, and he said, "It's all right, sir, she's round." And my father said, "Oh, thank you very much," and he put the receiver down. And I was so surprised, because I said, "Well, weren't you could have enthused a bit, or said, weren't you pleased that it got round?" And he said, "Oh, no," I said, "I knew it would go round." So I said, "Well, I know you've done all you've worked it all out, mathematically and all the rest of it." He said, "Oh, no," he said, "she went round a fortnight ago. Mr. Bellhouse took her round at 2 o'clock in the morning."
Once the public got to ride on them, it seemed that the problems for the coronation were over.
I've heard that when they came out, people would actually miss a few trams just in the hope of getting on a coronation.
Yes, that's quite true, they did, yes. And a lot of people just went for a ride along the promenade just for the sake of having ridden on one. They weren't really going anywhere, they just went there and back.
With all that popularity, Walter Luff's dream of a tram for the future must have seemed secure. But the thing that was still puzzling Suggs was why you can still take a ride on this balloon-class tram from the 30s, but not a coronation from the 50s. Sadly, this was a question even the great man's daughter couldn't answer.
I know it's something to do with the controls, but to really find out, you really ought to talk to an old driver who's had actually driven one of the coronation trams, because I don't think the people nowadays could possibly drive it, because it is so different.
It hadn't occurred to us that we wouldn't be able to find anyone that could drive it. That's because her controls are totally different to any tram before or since. And that was the problem weighing on Suggs's mind as he made his way back from Daphne's.
Hello, stranger. How you doing?
Good. I've got to say, it doesn't look like much has changed in here, though.
Watch it.
Come on, mate. We've done loads of work. What you don't realise is that most of these trams only have 2 motors, and we had 4, and it was quite hard work getting them out.
When we wrestled them, but we did it.
But I've got to say, having travelled on some ordinary trams, you can see how much wider and bigger the interior this is.
Well, this is the ultimate 1952 tram, isn't it? They threw everything at it. Double the number of motors, make it bigger, better. The control unit, the thing that makes it go fast and slower, it's just out of this world. It's like something from Doctor Who. But we got it out, and Jerry's sorting that out at the moment with Brian. So,
Brian, he's our electrical expert.
Yeah.
I've not met him yet. Where is he?
He's lurking down the front with Jerry.
I should go and meet him.
Keep up the good work. See you later, mate.
See you later. Hello, Jerry. Hi, Alan. And you must be Brian.
I am.
Pleased to meet you.
How do you do?
What are we looking at here, Brian?
Well, this is the main control unit from the tram car there, and it normally lives up in the roof.
So basically, this controls the flow of electricity to the motors.
That's correct, yes. It's controlled from the driver in the cab.
The complexity of the unit really pushed the technology of the 1950s to the max. Nowadays, all this lot would be replaced by a little black box of electronics. Compared to the unit, the controls in the cab appear to be simplicity itself.
Well, this is it. Forward for go, and back for stop.
As opposed to having a separate brake.
As opposed to having a separate brake. You've got the braking on this.
Although it looks dead simple, there's no other tram in the Blackpool fleet that has the accelerator and the brake combined in one control. And the more we thought about it, the more we realised that we were going to have to find someone who'd actually driven one, so Philip could get some tips. Otherwise, there was a good chance he would be mowing down pedestrians all along the prom. But no one was going to get to drive it unless we could get the motors working again. And to do that, Axel had to set off to a specialist firm near Nottingham to work with Jeremy Clarkson lookalike Dave Hesketh. Like Axel, when it comes to stripping things down, he's a man who prefers heat to a spanner.
Whoa! It's been 30 years since that's been off.
With the end of the motor off, they can strip down the rest of it with more conventional tools. The electric motor is in fact one of the simplest motors around. In essence, it consists of a series of electromagnets called the armature, spinning inside a set of permanent magnets. The electricity to power the electromagnets enters at the back via two bits of metal called bushes rubbing against a ring of copper contacts around the axle.
Right, so this is what we've got. The armature here.
Yeah.
525 volts DC.
Yeah.
Into here.
Yeah.
Boost it up. This whole thing spins.
Yeah.
Then gives us forward and backward motion of the axle.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Key to a smoother running motor are the copper contacts at the back where the electricity enters. It's important that they're clean and perfectly smooth, so Axel whacked it on the lathe to take off just a few thousandths of an inch to get back to shiny metal.
I know how Jay feels now, because if I make this cut too deep, I'll mess the whole job up. Almost there. 50 years of grime, now we're going to have a brand new one.
It's perfect. You've got a perfect new copper.
Can I say that again? Huh? Can I say that again? Perfect. I like that.
It's perfect, yeah.
That done, Axel's next task was to refurbish the metal bushes that will run on the newly cleaned contacts.
It's amazing. 50 years old, and it's brand new.
Once it was all back together, it headed off to the test bay. In the tram, it runs at about 750 RPM. And to make sure it was up to the job, the plan was to spin it at twice that speed. Either it would hum away nicely in a rather unspectacular way, or there would be a loud bang and a lot of blue smoke.
All right, Dave. Averaging 1250.
That's okay, that is.
Excellent, mate. Oh, mate, I'm so happy. This.
50 years running there.
I know. And it's running so smooth.
Yeah, brilliant.
Brilliant indeed. At least one of the motors worked. 3 more and we'd be in business. But for the motors to run, they'd need a controller. And back in Blackpool, Jerry was busy stripping ours down. What makes it so special and complex are the 90 contacts that control the flow of electricity. Each one is like a switch, allowing a little bit more juice through to the motors. Older trams had 8 of these switches, which accounts for their jerky motion. But by using 90 switches, the Coronation had an acceleration smoother than your average Rolls-Royce. Unfortunately, it also meant Jerry had weeks of work ahead, stripping down and refurbishing each one.
What's supposed to happen? What's that? They're all bust.
But just when he was getting to the end of the job, he found something totally unexpected, and the chances of us ever getting our tram finished took a nosedive.
Earth's this?
Oh, no. Blimey, Riley. We've had a fire in here. It's toast.
Very expensive toast at that. The whole ring onto which all the switches are attached was going to have to be replaced, and that wasn't a job we could do ourselves.
It's a heap of scrap. What we need is a piece of material to replace it with that is not only insulating but heat-proof, but also can be bent in a circle and be capable of taking 1,001 holes. I don't know how to do that. I knew we were biting off more than we could chew when we took this thing on, and now we're in very, very serious stuck.
Too right we're in stuck. No ring, no controller. No controller, no tram.
I think that was the low point of the project. I mean, no one could have known that there was a problem hidden deep inside the unit. And you just can't buy these things off the shelf. Only a few were ever made in the first place. And what's worse, today, we just don't use those materials.
As soon as Jerry discovered evidence of the fire, the lights went out on the chances of us ever getting the tram ready for the illuminations.
Right, you are. Yeah, off you go.
The outside of the tram would be covered by a thin skin of aluminium, so Axel popped over to the body shop to cut out some new panels. So they don't vibrate against the metal frame of the tram, Jerry and I got into some recycling, cutting out old seat covers and gluing them onto the frame. Where's Linda Barker when you need her? Next we painted the back of the panels with red oxide paint to help protect them from the salt air. This red oxide, Joe, is fantastic, isn't it?
Oh, it's great. I love it.
Keeps all the rust off.
Goodness, Claire, we've got a regular Lowry over here.
With Jerry's masterpiece painted out, we got on with nailing them onto the tram itself.
Hook it underneath. That's it. Whack it up. Just slide it over a bit.
Oh, is he hanging over the panels? You drill them, I'll fill them. Well, 2 on. Many more to go. It looks good, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's beginning to look like a tram.
Start.
Start, yeah.
Start.
Plenty more to do.
20 panels later and we can finish the job with a simple aluminium bead to top the whole lot up, which I think works really, really well.
You got that?
Yeah.
Then. Should get that first one in then. It's looking good, isn't it?
It is, it's all coming together. Oh, and you've got to line the screw heads up properly, because when you went on the other trams, you sit up and down the front, every single screw head was lined up. It's wonderful.
Getting the bodywork done did make us feel like we were making progress, and blue skies seemed to be returning for Suggs too. He'd managed to track down an old tram man, Jack Nichols, who he hoped could give Philip a crash course in driving our Coronation.
Well, it was great to drive them, you know. A roomy cab, decent seat, instead of a bit of wood with a bit of plastic on it. And you could sit down, you got all the controls around you, very handy, you know.
And beautiful to look at.
Well, I won't say beautiful, but certainly it was good looking, you know, and it had this different look, you see. It shone, as it were, in the sun as compared to the old green and cream of the other cars. It did stand out.
With more hours driving Coronations than anyone else alive, Jack had a pretty good idea of why the fleet was scrapped.
It was no problem until you could be driving sort of 99 times out of 100 until on that one occasion, 1 in 100 times, you would put the brake on and nothing would happen. And this was rather off-putting, to say the least, you know. The road was clear, just moved across, put some power on to take her across, and then, pshong, I missed it. There was a van across my path and missed it by about 3 inches. And the thing was that at the next, Heathrow Road, the next stop, pulled up just normally. It wasn't until after the trouble started that drivers began to be a bit wary, and they would refer to these trams as spivs. The spivs were very flash characters. You see, they were very good to look at, very flashy, but they didn't work too well occasionally.
It seems that the tram's control unit, the variable multi-notch acceleration and braking unit, to give it its proper name, was key to its demise, sometimes jamming on, causing 8 tons of tram to trundle along the prom out of control. And back at the workshop, Jerry and electrical engineer Brian Pickup had just taken delivery of the refurbished unit. It looked fantastic, and together with my newly re-insulated trolley pole, we lost no time in getting it back onto the roof.
I hope we don't break it at this late stage.
Right for the springs.
Yeah, brilliant. Smashing that.
Nice one, Claire.
Yeah,
wasn't
smashing.
too bad.
No, it was grand, wasn't it?
Yeah. A lot easier getting it in than taking it out.
Trouble, wasn't it?
Well, that's fantastic.
Right, let's get the tower on.
Okay,
on then.
let's do it.
The tower sits above the control unit and forms the base for the pole. The pole is key to making the whole thing work. Powerful springs on the tower keep it pushed up against the wire. At the other end is a brass wheel with a groove in it, which simply rolls along the wire, ensuring a good contact is maintained at all times.
The trolley base rotates through 180 degrees, so that when you get to the end of the track and you want to turn round, just move it around when the trolley pole's sticking out the back, so you can change direction. It's brilliant, really simple, very easy. Chaps, can I have the trolley arm?
All right, mate. Got it. Yep, got it. You're too short, Claire.
Come on, my arm's starting to hurt.
Don't worry, you've got the easier. Yeah.
Well, I think that's enough cranking up now. Do you want to give it a go now, Claire?
We have contact. Do you want to connect the cables?
Okay, mate.
Right, you put me some tape on that connection now, Les?
Padlocks off and we could throw the switch.
Right, Jerry, go for it, mate.
We've got power.
But that's only to the lights. The control unit's real job is to supply 550 volts to the motors to power her down the prom. But there was a lot of work to do before we could take her out.
What we need now is more trim, more windows, seats in.
Yep.
Do the pretty, shall we?
Yeah.
Come then.
With the electronics done, we turned our attention to the pretty bits, getting her back to the queen she was in 1952. With Jerry up above, I was down below, trying my hand at floor laying.
Got a very steady hand for this job. I shouldn't have been out in the sauce last night. Oh, look at that, that's almost professional.
Then there were a few dozen windows to fit,
Okay. Bottom.
each with its authentically squeaky winding mechanism.
Go on, give it a whiz.
Yeah? Okay.
I'll hang on to it.
Right, mate.
Perfect.
Hello, Jerry.
Oh! Excellent.
Happy with that, mate?
Yeah, it's grand.
Next up, her rather ingenious seats.
This is looking good.
Isn't it? Take a seat, my dear.
But this is it, isn't it? If you ask someone to describe a tram, they never talk about the motors or the control system or anything like that. They always talk about the seats that tip backwards and forwards.
That's
and
right.
the cladding and all the rest of it.
Shall we have a go?
Yeah. Let's change direction of travel.
Cool. I like this. Bing, bing. Yes, please.
Tickets, please. Oh, come on then, more seats.
Oh, I've got 22 to go.
Get on with it.
All right.
In all, it took another 3 months to finish her, but with one last coat of paint, she was suddenly done.
So it's the big moment, Phil.
Wow, what a transformation.
You haven't seen it for a while, eh?
No.
And hopefully you're going to drive it now.
Let me at it. Hi guys.
Hello.
What a fabulous job. It looks absolutely superb.
You like it,
does. Oh yeah.
Is that good, mate? I might keep it.
You can keep your thieving hands off. Can I have a look inside? Wow, it looks superb.
It's all come together.
You happy?
I've never seen it like that. You've even got the original red flooring. That's great. That's super.
Beautiful, guys. You've done a great job. Looks like a ballroom, doesn't it? I feel like dancing. Anyone want to dance?
It's large enough, isn't it? What you need now is a show, someone to drive it, yeah?
Well, the tram's finished, and in a few minutes we're going to get going. But I've noticed that Phil is wearing a very smart tram driver's uniform, so I think I better smarten myself up. Take me to my tram.
And of course you've got
With Suggs getting tarted up, Jack Nichols was giving Philip a few tips on how to drive the thing.
forward, for going forward, of course, and reverse, pulling it back. Now, back to the joystick. You don't really need to push it straight down. You can just feed it one notch and just sort of listen, and you can just feel the car gradually moving off.
Right.
It doesn't sort of jerk off like some of the old cars do, you know. Any questions?
No, I think that'll do. The next question is, when can I have a go?
After me.
Well, everyone's on board. I'm suitably attired. Let's go.
Although she looked magic hurtling down the prom, there were problems right from the start. The va-va-voom that should have been sparking from the control unit was just not there. And by the time Philip's tram-crazy mates got on, all the whiz was gone.
Come on then, you lot, on you get. It's a free one. Plenty of room down the back.
Sadly, all she was capable of was a rumbling 10 miles per hour down the prom. Not really what we were hoping for.
And here's the culprit itself, the variable automatic multi-notch braking and acceleration control unit, or VANBAC for short. And it's just as complicated as it looks.
This electrical tap was the reason the tram rumbled rather than whizzed. It's like a mechanical version of a dimmer switch for a living room light. There's around 90 individual contacts around the main ring. When each is switched on, they allow a bit more electricity to reach the motors of the tram.
This is just one of the 90 switches, and they all have a contact at the bottom there. If I just put it where it belongs, oh, I can really see why Jerry struggled now. It's got so many pieces.
Each of those switches is operated by a huge magnet, which swings past on a big arm, pulling the top of the switch towards it and closing the contact at the bottom. The fault was with the gearbox that drives the magnet, something Jerry never touched, so he's off the hook.
So this is the big arm with the magnets on.
Yeah.
But what was the actual problem?
Well, the problem was that it wouldn't go more than a third of the way round.
Right, so it's only getting a third of the way around. It's only getting a third of the potential power. So what caused that problem?
The cause of the problem was in the gearbox on the other side. And to see that, we've got to turn this over so as we can take the top off the gearbox.
Like everything on this tram, it weighed a ton. Thank heavens for cranes. But once we got it over, the top of the gearbox was off in seconds.
Oh, packed full of grease.
Yeah,
And what have we got here then? What's the actual problem? What was it?
that is the problem there. That gear there, which is driven by the motor, was slipping when the magnets were in about a third of the full position.
Right, so the driver's desperately trying to force the lever
Yeah,
around
and
to get
all-
more power,
Yeah.
and this little cog here.
All it was doing was turning round and slipping on that gear, like that. It was just slipping, just like that, because the bearings were worn in there, the shaft was worn.
So it's wobbling in its hole.
Yeah, and all it was doing is doing that, slipping, and not driving this gear.
Such a tiny, tiny
Yeah.
little thing to stop our great big Coronation Tram. And now what have we got then? We got all new bits?
Yeah, we've got a brand new gear there, and a brand new gear here, a new shaft, and two brand new bearings in the casting.
So is it going to work?
Should work, yes.
Yeah?
No reason why it shouldn't.
Any promises on that? Any guarantees?
Yeah, I've got to guarantee it.
You have?
Yes.
Excellent. So I don't have to come back here again
No.
then. Brilliant. Let's put it back together again.
Hopefully we've cracked it. Months and months of hard work, and the only thing between us and success was a tiny little worn-out cog. With any luck, when we fire her up again, she'll be off down the prom like a whippet, or I'll be out of a job. A year ago, Salvage Squad started restoring this magical Blackpool Coronation Tram. After months of work, made harder by the discovery of a fire, we fixed it all and took her out on the prom, only to find that the control unit still wasn't working properly. Another 6 months' work, and we've traced the fault to one tiny little cog. It's all been fixed, and the big question is, will it work? But don't get too excited. There's still one job to do before we can take this baby out.
So why am I here? A domestic goddess in a boiler suit?
It's because tonight we're going to do what we failed to do last year. Take our tram out with her sisters under the famous illuminations. But old Cinders won't get to come along unless every bit of her is looking better than you. Hence the scrubbing brush.
And last year I had 2 helpers with me.
I can't say I really love this work, but it does give me a chance to get to know her.
It's the little details that give this tram's age away. That's a little plate for putting your cigarettes out, so you don't do it on the lino or the upholstery.
With the last bit of polishing done, I just had time to clean myself up before I headed out to the prom, in the hope that I'd done a good enough job for Philip and his mates to stop and let me on.
It's 9:30 at night, and it's the moment of truth for Philip and his mates. We've been working around the clock to get this tram ready for its maiden voyage under Blackpool's illuminations. There's a tram coming down the tracks now, and it could be ours. It's fantastic, isn't it? What a thing of beauty! And look at its speed! Hello! There's Philip! Let me on! Hello! Hello! It's all looking very good.
On board were all Philip's tram-loving mates,
You were certainly travelling at some speed back there.
getting their big night out a year late. And up front was the man himself.
Are you pleased with what you've ended up with here?
Oh yeah, I mean, without Salvage Squad, the tram would have still been sat around in a damp old bus depot in St Helens.
For me, it's certainly been worth coming back to see it speeding down the promenade past the illumination.
Well, it's been good to have you back, I can say that, and also it's been good to show you, you know, the proper finished product that we wanted to achieve last year, but it was a very big project, probably one of the biggest that Salvage Squad has ever done. And to get as far as we did in 6 months was just an outstanding achievement in itself.
I think the hardest thing for me to get my head around is the only thing that spoilt it last year was one tiny little
I know,
car.
it's incredible when you think about it. There's something insignificant in itself of size could actually cripple a vehicle like this, really.
Yeah.
So far, for all the brave talk, we've not really tested the controller, and I was dying to see what would happen when we really gunned it.
We've not opened it up. I mean, this tram's capable of doing about 45 miles an hour.
Are we going to get away with doing that? Come on.
Well, we'll see a bit further down.
Come on.
Guest of honour in the back were Philip's long-suffering parents.
We knew we'd got a genius in the family because we ended up with the only tram driver in Blackpool that had a university degree. And we wondered why all our expense on his education had gone.
But they needn't have worried. Philip might be a tram restoration nut by night, But his day job is as a tram consultant working on the design for new systems from London to Palm Springs.
We are definitely proud of him. There's no two ways about it now.
So, thanks to Salvage Squad, the boy who published his first book on trams when he was only 16 is now the proud owner of the only working coronation tram in the world.
Next week, another chance to get the fireboat Massey shore floating down the Thames. Same time, 8 o'clock. Next tonight, the Time team puts Castleford on the map at the very edge of the Roman frontier. Stay with 4.